Let's jump straight in. Thanks for coming. Great to be here. Courtney, myself, you want to start? Talk.
So today we're going to be talking about testing and CI/CD pipelines, the good, the bad, the ugly. My name's Courtney Nickerson. I know a little bit about good, very little, as you can see in this photo, and a lot about bad and ugly. It was my son's birthday party just yesterday, and I did survive. He just turned 6. It was bad and ugly, but also good. So very appropriate to set the tone for today. I'm a developer advocate at KubeShop. I also do whatever else they ask me to do. He asked me to do a plethora of different things, and I do my best to do that. I co-organize the CNCF group in Bilbao. This is not my Spanish accent. I was born in the US, but I live in northern Spain, and so I organize the CNCF group there in Bilbao. I also help organize KCD Spain and KCD Islamabad, which is a semi-passion project of mine because we keep increasing the number of women who are participating as speakers. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, and in my spare time, I do also do things as an ambassador for CIVO, which is very fun and a very cool tool if you haven't tried it out. And yeah, what else? There's not much else to say about
there's
me.
a lot more to say, but that's only good things.
Those are all the good things. We'll keep the bad and the ugly for after the talk. And I'll pass it over to Ole.
Thanks. So I'm Ole Lensmar. Great to be here. I'm CTO at KubeShop and for the Testkube project. Also, if you've used something called SoapUI, I created that exactly 20 years ago now. It's been a while. It's still around. I was also very involved in the Swagger ecosystem. If you're familiar with Swagger, something that I worked on a lot. I do spend my free time on my bike playing guitar or at the cinema. Usually not everything at the same time, but in this GPT-generated picture, that's where it ended up. I do also have children, but they're at an age where they'd rather not be in a photo, especially not when I'm involved. So I'll just mention them and move on. Okay, so we're actually going to do a short poll, please, because it'll help us a little bit later when we dive in on things. First of all is which CI/CD solutions do you use? So maybe you're using Jenkins, Argo CD, GitHub Actions, GitLab, Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, CircleCI. I mean, there's a lot. Tekton, there you go. Awesome.
Very cool, quite a spread.
It's very cool. I have never seen this before.
Wow. Keep them coming. That's great. Even some Bamboo Urban Code Deploy. TeamCity. GitHub, so we've got a lot of Git practitioners with us today.
I guess what we can't see here is if people use more than one. Maybe a hand in the air would be great just to see if you're using more than one. Okay, a lot of you. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, because we have 3 questions and we don't want the entire presentation to be about the poll. As exciting as it is, since we're going to talk about testing, it'd be great to hear kind of what testing tools you use in your CI/CD. Or outside, but preferably. So that could be like K6, Playwright, Cypress, Selenium, JMeter, PyTest, Postman, Rest Assured, Cucumber, SoapUI.
Clearly, he's the CTO of the bunch.
Trivi, Karate. Oh, that's a nice one. Ginkgo, definitely. JUnit. Goss is a new one to me. I'll have to look that one up. Helm Unit Test.
Okay. 5 more people typing. That's great. Oh, 6.
Oof, lots of typing. This is actually a high typing exercise, this presentation. Okay. So if I move to the next slide, what happens on?
You'll cut them off.
I'll cut them. I don't want to do that.
So 10 more seconds for people to respond.
Okay, nobody's typing. Here we go. And the last one is multiple choice, because it could have been a lot to type. So what's the hardest thing when it comes to running tests in CI/CD?
Oh, wow. Wow. That was fast.
So is it hard to define how to run your tests?
Okay.
Is it scaling, so running your load tests at scale or running a lot of tests at the same time? Is it about troubleshooting? How do you get to logs and reports and artifacts that might be generated in your infrastructure or from your testing tool? Is it reporting and analytics, kind of over time, pass-fail ratios, that kind of stuff? Or is it just triggering your tests from your pipelines or from your GitOps reconciliation process or whatever else? Or maybe you don't have any struggles at all. There you go. At least some of you are the lucky ones. Okay, 30 people answered. That's
43% defining how to run tests. That's
fantastic.
great.
Okay, great. Thank you so
You're
much.
in the right place.
Okay. Let's move on. So I know I'm going to be preaching to the choir here, but what is a CI/CD pipeline? I think everyone knows, but I'll say it anyway. CI is about integrating your code changes regularly into your code base and then building any artifacts from that. And then CD is then deploying those artifacts into your infrastructure. So to try to kind of separate those two, and then I'm sure you've seen some version of this picture before where the different steps in the CI/CD process. And obviously, testing is super important across all those steps, right? So you want to be testing both functional tests, that could be unit tests, API tests, UI tests, end-to-end tests, anything that kind of tests the functionality of your components that you're building or the code you're writing, but also non-functional testing, super important. So performance testing, load testing, security testing, compliance testing, accessibility testing if you're building something for a public, or well, for anyone to interact with, or acceptance testing, which kind of falls a little bit in the middle. And these are all things that are great to automate as part of those CI/CD pipelines. I will say, because I have a testing background, that doesn't mean you should only do automated testing. You should definitely also invest some time into exploratory or manual testing, meaning get someone there using your system, because people are much smarter than tools, at least for now. We'll see where we end up. And having someone actually test the tool and testing what you're building manually and trying to be creative and finding errors and doing that kind of thing as a complement to automated testing is a well worth investment, but I'm not going to go down that path anymore. So there are a couple of challenges with testing in automated testing in CI/CD, and I'm going to talk a little bit to that, and then we're going to show a little bit of things as well. So one of them is that what we see a lot is the proliferation of testing tools and scripts. So if you go back 20 years in time, maybe the number of testing tools wasn't that big. There was Selenium for browser UI testing. There was an API testing tool, which I've mentioned a couple of times, and there were others. Now, there's a whole bunch of tools, right? There's Cypress, there's Playwright, there's Selenium, there's others, Robot Framework, which is on Playwright. For front-end testing, there's a bunch of load testing tools. We have JMeter, we have K6, we have Artillery, we have Gatling. There's a bunch of unit testing frameworks, and there's a bunch of tools in between. And since we have this shift left, which some of you might know, where you want to do testing earlier, and we've also had these microservices architectures where everyone does their own thing, and maybe it's even in a polyglot environment where everyone can choose their own language and technology stack, you're going to end up with a bunch of testing tools. And how do you make sure that all of those testing tools can work in your CI/CD pipelines? And you might be even running multiple versions. One team is using Cypress 10 and the other team is using Cypress 11. And how do you make sure that all of that works nicely in a proliferated environment? Oh, and something just happened, which I can't account for, but I'll just continue talking. Wait a second. Not sure why it did that. Next one is proliferation of CI/CD tools. Once again, 20 years ago, it was Jenkins, not yet, maybe, the precursor to Jenkins. There were some others, but now a lot of people have Jenkins, and then they added maybe a GitOps tool like Argo CD, or they're moving to GitHub Actions, or GitLab, or any of the other tools that we saw here. So what does that mean for testing? And now you have 5, 6, 7, 8 testing tools. You have 2 or 3 different tools that are running your pipelines. How do you make sure all of those tests are still running? They're running in a consistent environment, so you get the same results wherever you're running them. And then running tests whenever needed. Running tests just in your CI/CD pipeline is great as part of your build process, but it's pretty common that you might want to run your test out of bounds. I just want to go in and run the test. I don't want to run the entire build. Or I want to run my test when my resources are updated in my Kubernetes cluster, or when, I don't know, some other event happens, which is not strictly for CI/CD, and which makes today, which if you can't do that, if you're binding your test execution to your CI/CD, it usually slows down your entire process, and you don't have the flexibility that you might need. Running tests at scale, we saw that as one of the here. So a lot of people are running tests. That's great. What if you want to generate massive load for a K6 test or a JMeter test? Do you go to a cloud provider like BlazeMeter or K6 Cloud, or do you want to run it inside your infrastructure? What if you want to scale out your functional tests? Let's say you have 1,000 Cypress tests. Running those in sequence can take hours. You might want to parallelize those tests to run in parallel to cut down your test execution time, so it's realistic to run all those tests at the same time. And then, once again, this multiplies if you take on the previous bullets I had. Obviously, not a problem of a startup or of an early project, but hopefully that startup will eventually be a huge company with hundreds of engineers and maybe even a QA team. And as they've evolved, they've adopted different tools, and they still have legacy tools in-house. Test troubleshooting and test result, which was a test result management, I guess it's supposed to say. Once again, going back to earlier, let's say if your tests are failing, how do you know how to troubleshoot that? Let's say your test touches a microservices architecture. You have 10 microservices involved. You're going to have to collect logs from all of those, maybe, to see, can I find some stack traces? Can I find some errors? You're going to want the errors and logs from your testing tool. Maybe it recorded a video of what it did, or a trace, etc. And all of that, how do you pull all of that together, make it easy for the tester or the developer to get access to without giving them access to your infrastructure from a security point of view. So there's a bunch of kind of complexities there. And the last one, giving control to QA. We see this also. The DevOps team doesn't always want to let QA into the Jenkins environment or into the GitHub Actions environment. They say, hey, so the QA team, well, can you, change the arguments for the playwright test, or you can do this and that goes into a ticket into Jira, and then, and a week later, that gets updated. Which is a barrier, obviously, for kind of having a fluid and more agile process. Lots of good stuff there. So, Cortney, yeah. I know what I talked about was maybe a little bit abstract and high level, so I can hand it over to you for a little bit more down-to-earth description of these challenges.
Yeah, let's take a look at what these challenges actually look like in a pipeline or a workflow that is a bit more familiar and not quite as abstract. So a lot of people are starting off all of this with a CI/CD build system. That's where you get started, and that's where all of this action actually takes place. But these systems aren't actually built to run tests. They're built to do totally different things, to deliver software, do continuous integration of that. And testing, while it is a component, it's not exactly what these tools are built for. So we're already starting off with a block that isn't ideal. And then we start there, and then we trigger into the associated scripting systems, where scripts are usually stored in a lot of your cases we saw in the survey, in GitHub. That triggers GitHub Actions or Jenkins pipelines. And then that's going to go ahead and trigger your actual tests, and then that's going to give you some sort of output with artifacts and other results that you need to have access to in order to be able to troubleshoot. But none of these things are actually in the same place, because they've got different places for each type of test that you've run, depending on how you've got that set up. And so this becomes a bit complex. Let's take a look at all of the different places. This is just starting off with really basic stuff of where things can go wrong or become complicated or start taking up time, because obviously this is not an ideal system. You've got a DevOps team that's going to be called upon by a lot of different people in order to maintain all of this and keep it up and running. That now becomes a human issue. We all know those are the most difficult to manage. And that's cutting back the amount of time that people have to be productive so that they can manage all of these different things. Then you also have the fact that in order to trigger these tests, it's bound to your CI/CD system. And a lot of times you don't need to trigger tests and a build. You should be able to trigger just the test. It's counterintuitive, depending on your situation and what it is that you're testing, to have to trigger from a build process. So that adds on another layer of complexity. Then you have manual scripting. I'm sure anybody who's run tests, manual scripting is your favorite thing next to YAML. It's where you love to spend your time, right? But obviously in this type of setup, you're now doing a lot of manual scripting. People's levels of being able to do that are also varying, and it leads into a lot of different problems that can happen there with human error. And then once you get past that, you're now into scaling, because this is a Kubernetes event, and everybody who's here is interested in being able to scale all of their projects. And whether it's load testing or anything else, to be able to do that at scale is already quite complicated to orchestrate. When you already have all of these other things that you're dealing with just to get started, then the scaling becomes a bit daunting in and of itself. Then versioning, everybody wants to be Git-oriented and know what's going on and keep track of things, but how do you do that when you've got 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 different tools running with all of their various components? And then we're moving into security issues. Your artifacts are in different places. Your security team doesn't want them in different places. Now you're having to deal with your security team who nobody wants to talk to those people. At least I don't. So we've got all of these different things that are happening, and then on top of it, you then have to report. How are you doing in your quality assurance? Well, it depends how you're going to pull those reports together, because apparently your Cypress report is in one place, and then you've got your Golang report, and you've got your JMeter report somewhere else, and so you have to find some way to pull all of those things together. And so this is definitely something that becomes quite difficult to do, and on top of it, it's spending a lot of time trying to sort out all of these different things, and all of it starts with the fact that your CI/CD pipeline is not ideal. It hasn't been built for testing. It's built for something else, and we're just substituting in order to get this done. So this is kind of what everybody's test execution machines look like. It's a modge-podge of different things, and they're all kind of held together by a thread, and you're hoping that they don't all fall apart. And so you can see all of the different components there, and how do you possibly orchestrate anything to be able to scale out your tests and get all of that to go faster? Because at the end of the day, in order to ship your software, in order to ship anything that you are building, you're kind of dependent on how quickly you can get your tests executed and get results from those and troubleshoot those. And if it's not dependent on that, then basically you decided that quality isn't really important. And we all know we probably aren't running as many tests as we'd like, but we also all know that a huge part of that is because all of this is very difficult in order to manage and upkeep. So there are some people who are working on different things. There is some good at the end of all of this bad and ugly that can come out. And Ole is going to give a demo. So we've got Testkube. Testkube is a free and open source project. It is on the CNCF landscape. I promise it's there. I know that landscape is quite fast. But it is there. You can find it. Now that they have a search bar, you can find it even quicker under app deployment. It does have a commercial component, but you can get started with the free and open source version of it. It is compatible with any testing tool. This is very important. We're all running a lot of different tests, so it's compatible with any testing tool. Tests are added to your cluster as literally as a Kubernetes component. They are all CRDs. So yes, I did say nobody loves YAML and nobody loves scripting, but at least YAML is readable in a much easier fashion. And you have all of your scripts in one place or all of your tests running in one place, then at least you're managing them all at the same time. And that's the other big advantage of Testkube, is it gives you a single pane of glass across all of these different things and components because it has actually been built for testing. So you can trigger things from your CI/CD, but you're going to be able to have actually all of it in one very usable UI. And we can go ahead and take a look at what that looks like.
Great, thank you. So
back to you.
Yes, I'm going to do a little short demo of Testkube, but obviously a lot of what we're talking about have been leading up to this, and this is kind of the problems we've been seeing. So once again, Testkube tries to solve a problem that relates to the proliferation of testing tools, CI/CD solutions, and just more complex architectures and workflows related to testing. So it's maybe not for the project that just uses Postman tests in GitHub Actions. It's more for the project that does much more complex things. So I'm just going to show you a little bit what it looks like. This is the Testkube dashboard. Testkube works with environments. These are different environments where the Testkube agent, which runs the actual tests inside your clusters, is installed. I have one running in kind on my local machine, but there are others. This is running, this other one here. So, oops. Can we please click here? is running in Google Cloud. So you can see this has different configurations. So Testkube works with the concept of workflows, and a workflow is YAML. Won't hide with that. A YAML definition, which is stored as a CRD inside your cluster, which defines how to run your tests. And workflows as an abstraction above any testing tool. So as you can see here, there's a bunch of different workflows for PyTest, for Postman, for, I don't know, for whatever else, K6, JMeter, Gradle, Artillery, et cetera, just to kind of show you how that can be done. I'm going to jump into one of the workflows I had in my environment. There's a playwright execution. And one of the nice things with Testkube is that it also does the parallelization of tests for you. So this is a playwright test. Let's just run that right away. So this is now running on my local kind cluster. You'll see that it's running these different steps. It's parallelizing the playwright test across 2 nodes. And at the end, we're going to get some results. When this is done, we can have a look at those. There we go. So first of all, we can see the logs from all of the individual steps that were done as part of that workflow. We can look at the 2 workers that we had, and we can see the commands that were run on each worker. We can also look at the artifacts generated by Playwright. In this case, we have a Playwright report. So this is generated by Playwright itself. And this actually contains like traces and all that kind of stuff. So Testkube kind of grabs all the reports for you from any testing tool that you might be using. We can look at JMeter reports and others later on. It'll also show you kind of flowchart of how your tests. You might want to parallelize your tests across many, many nodes. We can do other examples later on. I do want to show what the YAML looks like. It looks like YAML, surprise. Yeah, it's YAML. These are CRDs stored in your clusters, so you can use Argo CD, or any GitOps Flex, of course, to synchronize them into your cluster and then run those either based on any kind of event that you want, and which takes us to triggering. So these workflows can, of course, be triggered from your CI/CD solutions, and we provide kind of inline code that you can just copy-paste to GitHub Actions, to GitLab, Jenkins, even for Argo CD or Argo rollouts. If you're doing progressive delivery, you can use these tests as an analysis template to kind of help you with both blue-green and canary deployments, kind of validate that your deployments are working. So this kind of decouples the test execution from CI/CD. You can run it from any of these tools. There's an API, there's a CLI, and there's a bunch of other things that you can actually connect it to. Triggers, which is a low-level mechanism in Kubernetes, so you can listen to events in Kubernetes itself. So let's say you want to run a test when a config map is updated, because that config map reconfigures your ingress controller, and you want to make sure that when that gets reconfigured, that your tests continue running. Or if you have a deployment that gets updated, and you want to make sure that you're running your end-to-end tests every time that deployment gets updated, regardless of if it's updated manually through kubectl or through Argo CD or through some other pipeline. You can hook into the triggering mechanism in Kubernetes itself. Webhooks, you can, I'm not a good example here, but you can hook, sorry, I'll go over here. Obviously, you can connect this to Slack, to PagerDuty, Zapier, et cetera, how you might want to notify for different things. It also has support for CD events, which is a CD Foundation standard, which helps you integrate. So if someone was using Tekton, which is also a CD events, CDF project, also has, and actually for Tekton specifically, I think we did see CI/CD integrations, Tekton. There's an example here of how to do that. So super easily to integrate into whatever you might be using to help you run your tests. Lastly, I don't want to go too deep in the demo because we're also a little bit short on time. We've talked about reporting. And this is also, Testkube will give you both insights into kind of the number of which tests you run, which tests take the longest, which could be interesting from a DevOps perspective. So how do I find those tests that ran for 20, 30 minutes? Maybe I should look into those, allocate more resources. And then, of course, more traditional test reporting where you can look at, by pass-fail ratios, that kind of stuff to figure out more higher level quality of all of your testing efforts. And this is, of course, across any of the tests that you run, right? So if it's any of the tests that we saw here, so we have a PyTest here, for example, and a test that was run, pretty simple one. Nice thing here is that we capture JUnit reports generated, so you can even see those directly from inside here, similar as you can do in Jenkins and other tools. So we are being inspired by what's already out there, of course. Lastly, I'll show you a JMeter test. So JMeter is a load testing tool, as you probably know. We can look at the latest execution of this one. We've run this quite often, as you can see, and we do have, oh, yes, we do have a report here. So this is the report generated once again by JMeter. So once again, it's available in one place. We don't have to give access to any other systems than Testkube itself to work with results and do all that kind of stuff that we've talked about earlier. Okay, and I'm actually going to stop here. There's a lot more features, but it's kind of the high-level rundown on what Testkube does and how and I think, once again, going back to what we talked in the beginning, the problems we're trying to solve around that complexity about scaling your testing efforts with proliferation of tooling and processes. Cortney.
Yes.
How would you like to conclude?
Yeah, I think the other big thing, because there was so much in our poll about defining tests, there's been a lot of work done within Testkube to make the definition of your test much easier, straightforward for people, especially when you're just getting started or you're not really sure exactly how you want to go about testing, that you can then build off of a wizard to be able to set up your test and then kind of grow it from there. That's a great place to start when you definitely don't know how you want to test something, or you've got some tests, but you think you need to go a step further with them. It's a much easier, intuitive way to be able to kind of see what's going on and read through what that test is actually doing. Other than that, there's a lot of ways to get in touch with Testkube team. Or with Ole. He's a plethora of information. He's been testing for how many years now, Ole?
Well, 25 maybe.
There you go.
Long. Did you have to ask that question? I don't know.
And he's still going. So obviously there's a lot that still needs to be done in the testing space. Here's a great example of one of the wizards to define your tests much easier.
Yeah, this is a K6 test. Let's see if it shows up. Oh, it didn't, because I already had that one. Sorry. London. Okay, whoops. Where'd it go?
Oh.
Here it is. So this is a K6 load testing. I just to kind of show, I created that test. I didn't show actually how to create a test. It's running across 3 workers here, but I could have set that number to 10, although my local cluster might have struggled a little bit. Once again, as you can see, it was super easy, and I can get the individual. Unfortunately, K6 in itself isn't great at reporting, but you do get a little bit of an output here, but they have a nice alternative solutions that you can look at for K6 specifically. Okay, I'll stop there.
There we go. Thank you.